My name is Heather Boerema, and I've been keeping bees for, this will be my 8th season now. I'm going to talk to you today about sustainability and on-the-spot queen rearing. I was privileged to be mentored by Mel Disselcombe. He helped me get a start in bees and was able to observe him in his yards and learn a lot from him and learn his on-the-spot queen rearing system. So when we're talking about sustainability, what exactly does that mean for beekeeping? Definition is the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level, avoidance of the depletion of natural resources. So for us in beekeeping, that means we try to keep our bees alive from year to year. Because if we can do that, then in the spring, we have something to start off with. Even if we lose a certain percentage, we still have something to work with to build back up again. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today and encourage people to do. I think that so many hobbyists and even sideliners don't realize the potential they have in their own backyard. And if they could just keep those bees alive from year to year, we could decrease the amount of packages we need and we could keep our bees local. And hold on, I'm trying to get my slide to change here and it doesn't want to change. Okay, there we go. Whatever your reason for keeping bees, obviously being sustainable is going to help you reach your end goals a lot sooner. Okay, you're going to grow your hobby a lot faster if you don't have to continually buy bees every spring. So obviously there is the monetary benefit. You can buy a 3-pound package of bees shipped to your door for like $180 to $200. Nukes you could find also, sometimes local, sometimes not local, $160 to $250. I've seen them advertised at. Or you can keep your own bees alive from year to year and they are free, which is a much smarter way to go. So whether you're completely brand new to beekeeping or you've been a beekeeper for years, now is the perfect time to learn how to be sustainable. So why should you be sustainable? We hit on a couple of those things already, but there's some really other important reasons besides money, okay? Local queens are a great benefit. Queens raised in your own apiary from your colonies, they're already adapted and thriving in your location. According to Mel, the best bee is the bee that you raise in your own backyard, okay? Really decreases the risk of spread of disease and pests that are possible with imported bees. Your packages are coming with possible problems that you don't want to deal with. And if you can keep your bees alive from your bee, you are managing those disease and pests and decreasing any risk right there in your own yard. Testing of the queens. One nice thing is if you have this queen end of July that you've raised your own, you can kind of see how she built up late summer and then through the winter. Obviously, if she makes it through winter, that's a good thing, right? But you can also see, how does she come out in the spring? Does she come out booming, lots of brood? How many stores did they take down over winter? Did they gobble it all up or did they leave some? So it kind of helps you to look at those hives in the winter and decide, which of these queens do I want to make some more splits from, and then choosing those top ones and then continually breeding off from those from year to year, making splits off from those, you get the traits that you want. And again, the money aspect. So some examples, and by no means is this list exhaustive, it's just some that I'm familiar with. Northern beekeepers who are sustainable, okay, obviously Megan, Dr. Milbrath, she is our academic specialist at MSU. She's founder of the Northern Bee Network and owner of Sandhill Bees. And this is a quote from an article that she wrote in Bee Culture a year or so ago, that it's absolutely ridiculous that that it has become normalized to take such high losses and then to replace them from out of state. And it's a horrible system, and we really need to get away from it. So again, back to the pest thing, we're contributing to the spread of pest and disease across the country when we constantly import bees. And then if you did listen to her talk this morning, also just that carbon footprint, just less waste if we can produce our own. Michael Palmer is another one from Vermont, Kirk Webster. His quote, raising local queens and overwintering them in a small colonies is a key to sustainable beekeeping. And that is Mel's passion also, just trying to teach people that you can keep your bees alive from year to year. And the way he does that is through the on-the-spot queen ring. A survival guide for beekeepers worldwide is the name of his book. He also has a website that's listed later. So how do you be sustainable? Okay. Obviously, you have to make surplus colonies. How do you do that? Honestly, there are tons of ways to make splits, multiple ways. And there's no way that's necessarily right or wrong. It's just maybe what works for one beekeeper, their style of beekeeping. If they're able to keep their bees alive from year to year, they're doing something right. So I'm not here to tell you one way is right or the other. I'm just here to share with you what On the Spot has done for me. Obviously, this is my 8th season. I haven't had to buy bees in 8 years, and I'm usually able to make a surplus so that I can sell some local nukes every spring also. So there's different ways, and in today's talks, a lot of these have been covered. Walk-away splits, giving right queen cells, okay? If you take some cat brood from your strong colony, and nurse bees, and then you're just giving them a cell that you've gotten from someone, dividing up brood and bees in each colony, and then giving each division a mated queen, okay, assuming that you got rid of or made a split with the already reigning queen in there. And then swarms is also a great way to make increase. So lots of ways to do it, and not only the right queen cells, but learning today that there's the possibility of 24-hour queen cells and 48-hour queen cells that can also be transferred in a timely manner, and you can use those instead of cap cells. Again, just some examples. With Mel's system, I don't often graft, but I decided I should learn how. So grafting is great. Because it allows you to make multiple cells of a specific queen that you like her genetics or like what you see in that colony. That's the only drawback that I ever find with On the Spot is that you can only make so many splits out of a certain hive from that queen. So that is the only reason I would probably graft over the OTS. Anyways, and there's some swarms, and those pictures are showing some making splits and that kind of thing there. So On the Spot queen ring, that's Mel on the left there. Probably recognize Chris from Dedant. Anyway, so why do I like OTS? Because it works with the bees timing. There's ample nectar and pollen coming in when you make these splits, so it's a lot less stress on the hive. You're not gonna do this during a dearth. You do it right away in the spring when they're starting to build up normally, and they want to start building cells that time of year. It helps with swarm prevention, okay? The only thing you really need is your hive tool and the ability to locate the right age larva. You don't need to have a grafting house or grafting tools. You don't need to have an incubator for cells. It's just very simple way to do it. There's really no stress on the bees because a strong original site hive, or the mother hive, if you want to call it, they are doing that hard work of raising the queen cells, okay, which means very well-fed queens. Sometimes if you just take you see a cell, so you take a couple frames of brood and move that cell to another hive, that if that cell is open, the bees, that small little colony then has to take care of it or take care of open larvae. With Mel's system, when you make that split, all the brood is capped, the cells are capped. There's no stress on those bees to have to feed, open larvae at the time. All they have to do is incubate the capped larva. So no break in larval nutrition. you know, and Mel has called that Farrar's Law, queen larva must increase about 1,500 times in weight between hatching from the egg and completion of feeding 5 days later. That is a massive amount of feeding. And if we interrupt that feeding at any point, that could cause poor queens because of lack of good feeding. So quality queens that are produced by family, they're never handled, mistreated, and usually not rejected. I have, with OTS, rarely, if ever, do I find that they didn't like their queen when she came back mated. And obviously quality queens have more successful mating. They mate with more drones. So Mel's website, which does explain a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, it is a little bit more compartmentalized. And I would really recommend getting his book because it's laid out nicer than the website. But it is, all the information is free there on his website, which is the www.mdasplitter.com. This is another example of I guess you call him Northern in Ohio, John Schwartz, who also uses OTS. He's been keeping bees for about 15 years. He also sells nukes, local nukes every spring. I'm not going to read through all that. It just, again, kind of reiterates what I've said before. So usually with OTS, you never need to buy bees again. The biggest problem is you are continually having to find more equipment if you're looking at growing. That is something we give Mel a hard time for. So understanding what is on your frame is key, because remember I said you need a hive tool, but you also need to be able to identify the right age larva, okay? The picture on the left, I'm sorry, it's a little blurry. I'm just showing you the difference between black foundation and a lighter foundation. For me, I like all the black foundation because it just helps my eyes see better into those cells. Some tips for when you're pulling frames and looking for this right age larva is to kind of have the sun behind your back, tilt that frame, just helps you see a lot better. You sometimes work with new beekeepers in the yard and they don't see it, and you're trying to help them, and all of a sudden they get it just right and they're like, oh, I see it. So that's always fun to watch. The smallest larvae on the frame are the ones that you want to notch with your hive tool. So as you can see, the left upper corners, those are just way too big. Those larvae are way too fat to try to notch, or those are not anything you would ever graft, okay? Some of the beekeepers that I know will joke it's the one that you can't see, okay? Because it is that just turning, hatching from that egg, and the very small, all right? So this is a better picture. This is actually right from Mel's website, okay? Very, very small larva there, and those are the ones you'd want to notch. This picture is of what Mel will call virgin comb, or just very new comb. It's like putty. It's super easy to notch. You just take that hive tool and you're pulling that comb down, okay? And for some reason, with that off the bottom, they seem to be drawn to make the cells there, okay? And that's why we do that notch. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit here. So this is showing doing the notch, okay? And then it's the middle picture there. You can kind of see that comb is bent down underneath. You're not touching the larva. You are just going in about a third of the way down and then pulling that down below it, okay? And then a week later, you can see 7 days later, you're going to choose the best cells there, and you're going to eliminate the rest of them to prevent micro swarming. I know some people like to try to get those cells off when they make more cells. They want to try to distribute that, and some people have luck with that, you know, taking a razor blade and trying to get it off there. I usually just smash the cells that I don't need. So, because I haven't ever really found a good way to get them off. If you have just, you don't use foundation at all, then I'm sure they're much easier to cut out, and that would definitely be a possibility. But on the foundation, it's kind of hard to do. And the reason you do, again, the microswarming, you do want to break down to just 2 on each frame when you're making splits. And this is a picture of Mel showing older comb. It's a lot harder to notch just because it's very stiff from prior cocoons, so that gets built up in there. It is possible, you just kind of need to saw it a little bit with the tool and then pull down. It does help if you like kind of sharpen the edge of your hive tool before you start the process in the spring. And like Mel says, with proper notching, you get proper queens, okay? They build quality cells and you get a quality queen. So the first step, Mel's book explains this in much greater detail and probably goes into depth more. I'm trying to give you just the nitty gritty today, okay, to get you excited and encouraged to try it, to look more into it. So timing is everything, right? The week before swarming in the spring is when we usually do this first step. Okay, so that may be different depending on where you live. I live in West Michigan, and it's usually that first week of May. I think the earliest I've ever pulled queens here from the overwinter is probably April 17, and probably the latest May 18 or 19. So, but if you're not sure on the date, things to look for in a hive, in a colony that's overwintered, are at least 6 frames of brood, okay? And then live drones. Preferably, you're gonna probably have more frames of brood if you wanna make more splits, but you gotta have at least 6 frames of brood just to show that that colony is strong enough to be able to build cells and to make the splits later. So live drones, not just live, I like to see them actually flying before I feel comfortable. And the reason for that is, you need your drones to be flying for your queens to have someone to mate with, obviously. So you don't want to start the process too soon. So you're going to find the old queen in your hive. You're going to take her out with 2 frames of capped brood. Okay. That just meaning it's not open anymore. You can't see the larva. It's got that nice little capping over it. You're also going to take 2 shakes of nurse bees. And by that, I mean, you're going to take a frame probably that has the open larva, and you're literally just going to give it a shake into the box that you're making a split with. Okay, the reason for that is you just wanting some nurse bees in there to cover that comb or the capped brood in your artificial swarm. You give them some honey and drawn comb. I usually make it 5 frames total. So you've got the 2 frames of capped brood, you've got honey, and then some drawn comb with pollen and stuff too, okay? So you're gonna put that, it doesn't matter what equipment you put them in. Some people, you can use a 5 frame nuke box, you can use a deep and then just fill that with foundation. I would recommend giving them some room because that queen's gonna keep laying and she is gonna need room. So you don't wanna leave them in a 5 frame nuke box too long, because once all that cat brood starts emerging, within a couple of weeks, they're gonna bust out of there. Also, you're gonna wanna reduce that entrance, okay? Again, anytime you have a smaller colony, you wanna decrease their risk of being robbed and have pests. So keep that reduced entrance very small. So before you leave, that's the first step, is getting that queen out of there, but also that same day, you're gonna notch those frames, those pictures that we showed earlier. So you're gonna find the open larva, you're gonna notch it, and you're gonna put them back in the hive, okay? And then you can probably scratch some frames of honey if they're in there, or you can feed syrup, all right? This is gonna stimulate the bees' wax production and assure that they are all well fed while raising those queen cells. All right, so the second step, you need to come back 7 to 10 days later, all right? And this is an important step that sometimes people ignore, but if they've raised, 20 some queen cells in there on your frames, you do not want all those queens emerging. You're gonna have lots of mini swarms and decreased risk of possibly you're losing bees that way. So do go back 7 to 10 days later, especially if you're going to make splits. You're going to return to the original site. By then, all the cells are capped. Okay, the majority of brood is capped. When I say cells, I'm talking about the queen cells. You're going to go through the hive and find the frames that have the cells on them. Okay, so usually take one out with, obviously it's got brood on it where you notched it. So that's your one frame of brood, and the other frame is another frame of brood. So maybe one will have one cell and another one will have one cell. That's great. I like to have at least 2 cells, sometimes 3, but I try to keep it to 2. Mel recommends just 2. Sometimes I do it with 1 if that's all I've got. Okay, so you've got 2 frames of brood, and then you're going to give them a frame of honey and pollen and some drawn comb, and sometimes I'll give them a frame of foundation too to draw out. So that start, you can make as many as you want. Sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want to make a lot of splits. That's fine. Just go back and knock down all the cells to 2, and then that is all you just have that one larger hive. I like to say at least always make 2 just in case one doesn't get mated. You can always recombine. Okay. And again, you're limited to the amount of splits you can make by how much brood you have. If you have 6 frames of brood, you can probably make a total of 3 splits, but that's including that artificial swarm that you started with. I think the most splits I've ever made out of one hive was maybe 7 or 8, but it had 14 to 16 frames of brood. So it just depends. You don't want to short your starts. You want them to have at least 2 frames of brood. So again, and then leaving the only 2 queen cells in each start. That's really important. People don't like to do it because they don't want to smash the cells, but it is really important to go back and do that. So once you've done that, that first week you pulled that queen, a week later you went back and made those splits, then you can just sit back and relax, okay? Because you really shouldn't be bothering that start after that. That just gives that those queen cells mature, queen emerges, she goes out, makes her mating flights, comes back. That does take a period of time. So it's usually 30 days from the time that you pulled that original queen. You're going to go back and look for laying queens. All right, you don't necessarily have to find her. If you see eggs or young larvae, you're probably good. That's a great sign. I would still recheck in a week and just lay eyes on that queen and look at that brood pattern. If the brood pattern is really nice and capped, then you're probably good, okay? And you've made a successful split. But just make sure they have room to expand. If you leave them in 5 frame equipment, you don't want to leave them there too long. They'll start drawing comb, like you can see on that left nuke box there. They need more space. They're putting a little comb on the top of that nuke box. So that is the 3rd step, and my favorite because I love seeing brand new queens. So, all right, so you've made a nuke. Now what are you supposed to do? Okay, you're gonna let them grow. Okay, the 3 cycles of brood before cold weather, I kind of skipped because we just talked about May, doing all this in May, and that these are usually mated end of May, June. And then we get to July, okay? And then July, we kind of start the same process over again, okay? Because then you got that younger queen going into the fall. So Kirk Webster aims to have the nukes on at least 4 to 10 combs, okay? Mel likes to see at least 6 frames of brood and honey on the sides or top stacked, okay? You're gonna have to feed those bees the end of September and early October to help them build stores for the winter. Any feeder will do, but I found that the 1.5 gallon frame feeder is the most efficient and saves time for me. Bees can usually take that down in 2 to 3 days. You're also gonna treat mites, okay? When you have those brood breaks in midsummer, that should have knocked back the mites naturally. And they've also done that when you did it in May. All those starts got a brood break, except for your artificial swarm. So obviously in late summer, when those mites start outproducing the bees, and horizontal transmission is also on the rise, being drones going in and out of hives, probably transmitting mites here and there. And then again, just to really keep those entrances decreased, especially as you move into a season of decreased forage and increased possibility of robbing. Again, that's just feeding. Then come winter, a lot of times these can overwinter in a single deep, and you see the feeder in there, so it's 8 frames, so they have honey on the sides.
smaller clusters, but they seem to do well. One, because they've had that brood break, they have a younger queen going into the fall and winter. And I'll also use winter bricks during the winter too. I check them every 4 weeks, maybe in November, December, January, but once February, March hit, they start going through stores a lot more, and then I'll be checking them more often. So again, overwintering, number one thing is they need to be healthy, right? Low to no mites, and that's the job that you actually start. You're monitoring that all year long, but especially in the summer and late summer. Stores, make sure they have enough ventilation, like an upper entrance, windbreak, the wraps. I use tar paper. I have a lot of beekeepers that don't use anything at all. So again, that's personal preference. Makes me feel better, so I wrap. And then checking the stores. And that brings you back to spring, right? And if you've done everything and you've made those extras to make up for your possible losses, you come out in the spring and you're able to share your bees with a neighbor, you're able to sell some nukes, build up your colonies or your business. Kirk Webster, he said, extra colonies, the very best local stock, are available to replace winter loss, expand the apiary, or for sale. And because the worker bees are all of daughters of a proven mother, the overwintered nukes are far superior to any packaged bees from the south or to nukes made in the spring with untested queens. No more buying replacement bees or expensive losses from unsuitable stock. So again, you might experience some loss, but you'll have made increase and you will be sustainable. So I know that was kind of short and sweet and a little bit probably difficult to understand if you couldn't hear me. So I apologize. Questions, and then these are some sites that I think you'll find helpful. Mentors, again, like I said, if you're a new beekeeper, to be with somebody even in their bee yard and just observing, someone who's available for phone calls, a mentor is really essential getting started. There's a lot of great online stuff out there. There is speakers that you can listen to online, obviously, all that kind of stuff. And the magazines, just keep yourself educated. So that is all I have.
Great, thank you, Heather. We do have a question. Ashley is asking, is it an issue if drones and queen from the same hive mate?
Well, it would be an issue. I think you'd have inbreeding, but when you, like for me, I have multiple yards spread out in different areas, and I like to exchange queens from other Michigan beekeepers. So, and then, you know, the drone congregation areas, the queens usually fly farther, so they usually don't end up mating with drones from their own colony.
All right. And then another question is all this information available in Mel's books?
Yes. Mel, especially, you know, the steps there, I kind of really condensed it. So you would definitely want to look into Mel on his website. All that information is there, but it's kind of compartmentalized. The book is actually a great asset to have as far as just the flow of things and understanding it.
And then another question, Pam is asking if you could repeat the queen brood break process around July.
Okay, yeah, July, that is a huge part that a lot of people actually skip. You know, they'll make their split in May and they'll be like, I'm good, you know, and they don't do it again in July. So to go over what Mel says, you know, that artificial swarm that you made in May, so that's the original overwintered queen from the year previous. So you get her to July, and Mel used to recommend dispatching her like you would take care of her with your hive tool, and you wouldn't have her there. But he's also said now that it does make sense to keep her in case something of yours doesn't mate, one of your new ones doesn't get mated. But then again, he just really wants to make sure she has that brood break. So that's why I'm saying to take her out and You can put her on just open comb, give her some nurse bees, give her a frame of honey, and she can build up from there till fall. And she did get a brood break that way, but you can't give her any brood when you take her out with the nurse bees. So the comb's got to be empty comb. And then the start, you would have notched the open larva again. And then a week later, you're going through each step again. So in July, they are getting a brood break. So you're not getting as much honey if you're going to do the split in May and the split in July. Yes, you may not get as much honey, but when your focus is more new production, that's okay. I do a bit of both, but my main focus is raising bees. You don't get surplus honey for the bees. I don't know, did that answer the question or not?
I think so. I think you did very well. Another question is, can you talk about post solstice queens?
Yes, and that is why the July splits that we just talked about are so important, because all those queens are post solstice. And that is that younger queen. That just means after June 21, right? The longest day of the year, one of my favorite days, but then you cry on June 22 because the days are getting shorter again. But queens mated after that point, Mel found, they just do much better because I guess they're younger going into fall, but they do very well overwintering. Okay, and before he started and wrote the book on OTS, he would realize that the colonies that survived the winter were usually ones that had superseded their queens on their own in the month of July. So that is one main reason for him looking into it more and doing it in July also.
Great. Another question is, when do you resume feeding syrup in the spring?
That depends on the spring. Like last year, we had a halfway decent spring and the colonies looked great. And even though it was the beginning of COVID, I didn't have the time to feed. So I didn't feed. I often will only feed ones that look like they're struggling some coming out of winter. And usually not until the days are like, it's not dropping down below 40s at night, because they usually don't take the syrup down very well below 50 degrees. So it just kind of depends on the weather. And I don't routinely feed in the spring. I mainly feed in the fall because those splits I made are a little smaller, and they haven't built up as much honey. So I do feed them then. It helps them draw out a little bit more comb. They get a little bit more stores on going into winter. But spring, I don't routinely feed in the spring.
Great. Another question that came in is from Amy. If you do split in May, could you just leave it the rest of the summer for honey production if you're not interested in selling the extra bees?
Yes. Yes, that is the one nice thing about Mel's method, that there's so many different options with it. So when you pull you make the artificial swarm so they don't swarm on you in May, you can have the option just to leave that. You don't have to split up that hive after you've taken the original queen out. You can go back a week later, and instead of making up the splits, making 2 or 3 splits based on those queen cells, you can just go back in, knock down all the cells except for 2 or 3, and then that hive actually does very well with honey production because they don't have any brood to feed while they're waiting for that new queen to be mated. And there always does seem to be a pretty nice spring flow, and you can have frames of honey right then, and sometimes it's nice varietal honeys. So yes, you can let that one go just for honey production. You would obviously want to treat for mites if you're not going to do a brood break again in July. But yes, there's those options to do that. And if you really wanted, Mel has experimented too with just, you get 3 starts, and then you can give away 2 of the queens. You keep the one, you recombine all those because they're sisters. If you made those splits on the same pallet and then go and combine them, that is like a powerhouse of brood. You've had those 3 queens that have been laying, so you've got all that brood. So when the flow does hit, they just, you know, do the above average honey production for those hives.
Great. And then she had a follow-up question, or would you just do the split in July if you want to make extra, I'm guessing extra colonies for overwintering?
Yes, you could just do the split in July. Yep. Because I think that's key is those post-solstice queens. Yes, those hives might be a little bit smaller, but that, like I said, they just seem to overwinter very well. I've had some big honey production hives that were big that I just didn't get to splitting again or doing the OTS within July. And a lot of times, sometimes if fall comes, those, and I have early losses, it's those because either my mites didn't get treated how they should have been, either with the oxalic or whatever. But those bigger colonies seem to be the ones to sometimes succumb, where the smaller ones do better through the winter.
Another question was, wouldn't a second split in July depend on location, forage, and weather?
Oh yeah, I mean, for everything, I guess everything in beekeeping is dependent on those things. Every location's different. For us, July is always a really good flow. So to make that split at that time, there's still ample stuff around. Going into August, you start hitting the dearth, and you know me, you might get goldenrod again in September. But yes, definitely your location is huge. Like pollen here in Michigan in the spring is amazing. So I don't often put pollen patties in either. But again, everywhere isn't the same, as we all know. So definitely important to talk to, you know, if you're in a different state, talk to other beekeepers, you know, about the differences that there may be.
All right. And then another question we have from Michelle. In July, must you use drawn comb with the old queen? This usually is the beginning of a slowdown in nectar coming in the landscape. So just concerned about being able to build that comb up, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, for us here in July, that is seemingly where I see the most wax production, honestly. But yeah, if you have comb, you know, you want to give her some drawn comb so she can just keep laying, and they need to start, you know, on something. You could throw them into just foundation, but honestly, if you're expecting her to get through winter and build up, then yes, the drawn comb, you know, at least 3 to 4 frames and a frame of honey to get them going. I'm not sure if I answered the question exactly or not.
Yeah, I think you did. And I think just to kind of add on there, you have Megan's website up there. And for those that are interested in the comb building aspect, Megan has a couple of great, or at least one great paper on there with some instructional pictures showing how to build up comb your first year or second year or whenever you're trying to build comb, but how to organize the frames and move things around and feed the bees so that you can get the most comb production, because that is a big concern for beekeepers.
Yeah, like they say, it's gold, right? The most
Exactly.
valuable.
All right. I don't see any more questions right now, but we've got a few more minutes, it looks like, before the next session. But if anybody else has any more questions, feel free to chime in. And Heather, great job. I'm glad we overcame the audio issue, and you did great.
Know. That was more like a nightmare.
Yeah.
Like, no. All right. No, that's fine. I appreciate everybody else sticking in there. It's been a long day too. I'm sure a lot of information and sometimes can be a little overwhelming. So appreciate the opportunity.
Yep, you handled it like a pro.
Uh-huh.
Oh, here's another question that just popped up. How many years do you let the frames in the hot leave the frames in the hives before the queens seem not to want to lay in them?
Boy, honestly, for me, I don't know because I go through so many frames every season when I sell nukes that my frames are always very new. I've only been beekeeping, let's see, 8 years, but I have to get 500 to 600 new frames every year that just keep rotating. So I am not sure on that, to be honest with you.
Yep. A good rule of thumb that I've always heard is that when they're a mahogany color, it's a good time to change them out.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Another question, how many frames can you pull out of a hive at a time? I'm guessing, I'm
Well,
not 100% sure what aspect that's coming from, but
yeah, I guess if you're talking for making us, when I make up nukes, I usually have 2 frames of brood. We figure if there's an overwintered hive and you have 20 deep frames and you're going to pull, each start or whatever is going to have about 5 frames. 2 frames of brood, you've got the bees on them, whether you give them a cell or whether you give them a queen. You always want to have enough bees for a decent start, but I'm not sure if that's what they're asking or not.
I'm not sure.
I mean,
That's probably what they were asking. Let's see here. I think I saw another. Oh, she's asking how many frames can you pull out at a time during an inspection?
Oh, well, if you're doing a full inspection and you're checking, you can check every frame one at a time. But if you're just going in and you're wanting to make sure everything looks okay, if I pull a frame and I see eggs, I kind of assume everything's okay and I don't go through the whole hive. And if you're checking every couple weeks like that, you should generally be okay and be able to catch anything before something goes haywire.
Yep. And one other question that popped up that I just answered there, I looked it up quick. Megan's website is .com, not .org, for those of you that might be trying to go there and not being able to find her website. So it's sandhillbees.com. Another question that popped up here, might be one of the last ones that we'll be able to do for time. We got a few more minutes here though. Can you put the new starts in a 10 frame box and just fill the sides with frames if nuke boxes are unavailable?
Oh, yes. Yep. I do it all the time. So it works just fine. I only have 10 frame equipment and I only have deeps. So it makes it really nice for interchanging things as far as honey frames and that kind of stuff. But yeah, you can always just fill the side frames with, empties, or if you have frame feeders, you can make them a little smaller that way. But yeah, you don't have to run out and get all different equipment. Usually you can make something work. Or you can even put dividers and that kind of thing too and put an entrance on the other side of a 10 frame deep.
Well, I think you might win the prize for the most questions that I've seen today, at least on the nukes and splits and queen rearing track. So congratulations, Heather.
Okay. Well, that's good. Appreciate that. Sounds good.